countries involved are Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger. Together, they have merged key elements of their armed forces under a shared structure now known as the Unified Forces of the Alliance of Sahel States. In the closing days of December 2025, these three West African nations, each having recently distanced itself from long-standing external partnerships, convened privately in Bamako. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger are now bound within a joint framework referred to as the Alliance of Sahel States, commonly abbreviated as AES. This alliance emerged in response to a series of military-led political changes, economic sanctions, escalating tensions with Western governments, and a shared sense of strategic isolation. During that closed-door meeting, a significant shift occurred. Burkina Faso's transitional leader, Ibrahim Traoré, was selected to assume the rotating chairmanship of the alliance, replacing Mali's leader in the role. However, the decision itself was not what drew attention. What followed was far more consequential. Rather than focusing on unity statements or outlining policy priorities, Traoré delivered a sobering message. He warned that West Africa was moving toward a highly dangerous and unstable period. His tone suggested urgency rather than ceremony. The question, then, became clear. What exactly was he warning about? On December 23, 2025, the heads of state of Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger assembled in Bamako for what was formally labelled the Second Ordinary Session of the College of Heads of State of the Alliance of Sahel States. Officially, it appeared procedural. Such summits typically involve strict security, private deliberations, and carefully crafted communiques released afterward. But what transpired inside the meeting room carried far greater weight than the official agenda. Before any formal announcements were made, before the issue of chairmanship rotation was even raised, Ibrahim Traoré took the floor. He did not speak as someone awaiting confirmation of authority. Instead, he addressed the room as someone sounding an alarm. He cautioned that West Africa was nearing a phase of extreme instability. He did not characterize this instability as random, cyclical, or accidental. He described it as intentional, organized, and deliberately engineered. He gave this looming phase a name, Black Winter. In Traoré's explanation, this was not simply a matter of insurgency or isolated security failures. He framed it as a coordinated effort designed to keep the Sahel region weak, divided, and dependent. Armed violence, in his view, was not merely a symptom of poor governance or regional complexity. It was a mechanism used strategically to drain national resources, overstretch security forces, and gradually turn citizens against their own states. According to this perspective, instability becomes a tool rather than a consequence. What made the moment especially striking was its timing. Traoré delivered this warning before any leadership transition was announced, before protocol took precedence, and before applause could follow. It was as though the message itself mattered more than the position he was about to assume. Only after this warning did the summit proceed with its formal agenda. Only then Wyatt officially declared that the AES chairmanship had passed from Mali's leader to Ibrahim Traoré. The sequence revealed intent. This was not a leader using a new title to shape a narrative. The narrative came first. The authority followed. The Alliance of Sahel States is not a symbolic body. It was created after 3 military-led governments withdrew from traditional security arrangements, rejected foreign military deployments, and endured sanctions, diplomatic pressure, and political isolation. For its members, the alliance functions as a mechanism for survival rather than image management. When Traoré spoke of an approaching black winter, He was speaking as someone preparing to guide the alliance through sustained external and internal pressure. He made it clear that the region was not entering a period of dialogue or compromise. It was entering a phase of intensified pressure. When Traoré elaborated on the idea of a black winter, he first directed attention outward. He accused imperial powers of intentionally sustaining instability across the Sahel. In his assessment, armed insurgency in the region is not merely the result of internal weakness or accidental escalation. Instead, it is carefully managed pressure. Armed groups are financed, redirected, and preserved as tools to weaken governments that refuse alignment, reject foreign military oversight, or attempt to reclaim control over strategic resources. In this framing, violence serves a calculated purpose. It drains state budgets, exhausts armed forces, generates humanitarian emergencies, and creates conditions that justify external intervention. Most critically, it erodes public trust until citizens begin to doubt the legitimacy and capacity of their own governments. Traoré's message was unambiguous. Disorder is profitable for those who do not endure it. But his critique did not end with external actors. Traoré then turned his focus inward, toward the continent itself. Without naming specific countries or leaders, he accused certain African heads of state of contributing to the destabilization of the Sahel. He described them as timid and complicit, suggesting they undermine regional security efforts not through open opposition, but through silent obstruction. According to him, some leaders weaken joint Sahelian initiatives by withholding cooperation, spreading doubt, and amplifying narratives that delegitimize AES governments. This accusation carried particular weight because it reframed the crisis. It implied that the Sahel's vulnerability is not caused solely by foreign interference, but also by internal betrayal. Leaders who speak publicly about sovereignty, while privately benefiting from regional weakness. Governments that tolerate instability next door if it diverts scrutiny from their own internal fragility. In essence, Traoré suggested that the Sahel is encircled not only by pressure, but by complicity. By crossing this line, Traoré made the alliance's position unmistakable. The AES was no longer attempting to remain neutral within Africa's political divisions. It was openly acknowledging that some governments are part of the problem rather than partners in the solution. The implication was clear. The alliance does not expect continental solidarity. It anticipates resistance, isolation, and retaliation, whether diplomatic, economic, or informational. This understanding explained Traoré's tone. He was not seeking approval or consensus. He was preparing both his audience and his alliance for sustained, multi-directional pressure. By the time he concluded this segment of his remarks, it was evident that this was not merely a warning about insecurity. It was a warning about alignment, about who stands where when pressure intensifies. This raised the next, unavoidable question. If threats originate both outside the region and within Africa itself, what path did Traoré believe the Sahel must follow to survive the coming Black Winter? He did not present alternatives. He delivered a conclusion. After outlining what he described as a coordinated destabilization effort, supported by external powers and internal collaborators, Traoré stated that neutrality was no longer viable. In his view, the region had reached a point where hesitation itself had become dangerous. He framed the choice starkly. Sahelian states must either bind themselves together permanently or accept gradual subjugation, not through invasion, but through sanctions, diplomatic isolation, financial constraints, and perpetual insecurity. Fragmentation, he argued, makes each country easier to pressure. Unity raises the cost of interference. This message was not intended to inspire mass mobilization or emotional defiance. Traoré explicitly warned against uncontrolled reactions and internal violence. His emphasis was on discipline, coordination, and endurance. Resistance, in his view, must be structured and deliberate, or it collapses into self-destruction. Unity, he insisted, cannot be symbolic. Shared speeches and joint statements mean nothing if countries retreat into isolation when pressure mounts. Real unity requires shared risk, collective responses to sanctions, coordinated messaging, and mutual defense when one member is targeted. This is where the significance of the ECOWAS chairmanship became clearer. Traoré was not positioning himself as a spokesperson. He was signaling that under his leadership, pressure on one member would be treated as pressure on all. As the summit progressed, the tone shifted decisively. What began as a warning evolved into a declaration of long-term posture. The ECOWAS was no longer presenting itself as a temporary response to political transitions and sanctions. It was asserting itself as a durable political bloc, prepared to withstand sustained friction with powerful external actors. Still, one issue remained unresolved. Warnings and posture are meaningless without mechanisms. Unity fails if it lacks structures capable of enforcing it militarily, diplomatically, and economically. That question was addressed next, after Traoré framed the choice as unity or subjugation. Niger's leader, Ibrahim Traoré, shifted the discussion from rhetoric to implementation. If the alliance was to endure pressure, he argued, it could not rely on shared sentiment alone. It needed systems built to function under stress. He outlined 3 concrete pillars already taking shape within the alliance of Sahel states. The first was an integrated defense force operating under unified command. This was not about symbolic joint exercises. It was about operational integration, one security space, one strategic outlook, and the understanding that borders would no longer serve as vulnerabilities for armed groups or manipulation. The second pillar was coordinated diplomacy. Separate negotiations, Traoré argued, had left Sahelian states exposed. Pressure often targets countries individually. The response, therefore, must be collective, one position, one voice, one message. The third pillar was a confederal investment bank. This was framed not as a development initiative, but as a sovereignty instrument. External financing, Traoré noted, often comes with conditions. Without independent financial tools, unity remains rhetorical. Beyond security and finance, the leaders acknowledged another vulnerability: public trust. Even the strongest alliance collapses if legitimacy erodes. That is why the summit formally recognized information as a strategic domain. Ministers were tasked with countering narratives designed to delegitimize ECOWAS governments and isolate them internationally. This signaled a critical shift. Information was no longer seen as a public relations concern, but as a security issue. And that raised the final, unavoidable question. What happens when the struggle for sovereignty moves beyond words and enters courtrooms? That moment arrived when Niger reasserted control over its uranium. France's state-linked nuclear company, Orano, filed a case in a Paris court, accusing Niger of unlawfully seizing uranium stockpiles. To the ECOWAS, this was not a legal dispute. It was the next phase of pressure resource control challenged through foreign courts. The alliance responded collectively, framing the case as judicial harassment. Un brode, attempt to reverse sovereignty through legal means. If such cases succeed, the precedent is clear: control over resources remains conditional. Under Traoré's leadership, the ECOWAS is preparing to confront pressure across military, diplomatic, informational, and legal fronts. The alliance is no longer resisting instability alone. It is resisting reversal. The question now is whether it can sustain that. Resistance long enough to make sovereignty irreversible. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Will sustained pressure force the Sahel back into the system it is trying to escape, or will unity turn defiance into permanence? Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for more.